Good evening, everybody. I see now it's exactly 7:30, so I'm going to start the class. You will notice that on Arc and everything has now been uploaded, so we're up to date in terms of the slides, in terms of the videos, as well as your assignment too. So there is a video for your assignment too, but we will have a session closer. I think your assignment is due. I don't think it's next week. It might be the week thereafter, or I might be fuzzy on the dates there. So just make sure you go and check because the template is there. Just a reminder also to please submit it as a PDF file for assignment 2, but the video is up as well. The template is up and the question paper is up. So everything is up for assignment 2. So we're just going to cover this last aspect and then you should be good to go for assignment 2. Okay. So we started part 1 last week and we were referring to the theory of demand, where we were looking at, in terms of the theory of demand, we're saying that as consumers, we want to maximize our level of satisfaction, but in understanding also that in order for us to do that, we are limited. And our limitation is then our income. So our income then kind of guides us in terms of how much of a good you can buy or how much in terms of volumes of a good you can buy, or a basket of goods we can buy and then ultimately consume, because our aim is we want to maximize our level of satisfaction. We must be able to gain something, right, from the consumption of these goods. Otherwise, if you're not going to gain anything from it, you would ultimately then not purchase that product, right? So now we're looking at it from a slightly continuing that thought process, but we're now looking at it from a concept of an indifference approach. Okay. So when we're looking at the indifference approach here, these are the two elements that we're looking at. Okay. So we're saying we want to describe what is an indifference curve, and then we want to state the law of substitution and describe the marginal rate of substitution. That's another element. Okay, so I tell the students usually try and think of this in the concept of a PPC and the opportunity cost. It kind of works the same concept. We're just calling it something different because it's based on goods and services, right? So just to recap again, we then said to you, the whole idea is you want to maximize your level of satisfaction. So we're saying you want to maximize your utility is another way of saying maximize your level of satisfaction. And then we said to you, there's two concepts here to remember. And we're saying there's the cardinal approach, so cardinal utility, and then there is ordinal utility. The easiest way to remember is ordinal kind of sounds like order, right? So in ordinal utility, we're saying, can you rank your goods based on a preference? So for example's sake, if you are going shopping, right, and you have this basket of goods that you have to purchase, can you rank those goods in order of preference? And most 99.9% of us, even 100% of us, can do that. And you say, yes, I prefer my my junk food over my fruits and veg. So you are able to rank it by preference. Okay. And then you have your cardinal utility, and cardinal basically means, I know the definition is the allocation of an absolute value. In English, what we're saying is, can you actually put a quantifiable amount to the level of satisfaction that a good is giving you? So if I say to you, the cup of coffee that you have in the morning, can you tell me what your degree of satisfaction would be from that first cup of coffee? If I had to say, please rank it out of 10. 19, all of us will be able to say, yes, it's 10. Or for me, for example's sake, I don't drink coffee. I don't like the smell of coffee. So I'm a bit of an outlier. So mine would be 0. I don't like coffee, but if you ask me what about tea or what about hot chocolate, then gladly I can tell you out of 10, that first cup is obviously going to give me a level of 10. So in understanding that we are consuming these goods to maximize that level of satisfaction. So that first cup of coffee in the morning that you take and that level of satisfaction that you're obtaining from that. So if your level of satisfaction is at a level of 10, that is what you are ultimately chasing throughout the day. So if you have that second cup of coffee or that third cup of coffee, you are never ever going to reach that same level of 10 the way the first cup of coffee gave you. Now, that's to say it's within a day. But the next day, when you have your first cup of coffee, again, it's going to give you a 10, and you are chasing that level of 10 throughout the day. So that's cardinal utility. Can you actually put an amount or a degree of satisfaction to the consumption of a particular good? Whereas ordinal utility is saying, can I rank this in order of preference? What is my preference level based on the goods that I have to consume or the goods I have to purchase, which ultimately means you will consume that. So there's the utility approach, cardinal, okay? And then there's the indifference approach. So where that then comes from is saying, if I had to now rank, remember I have my basket of goods. If I now have to rank it, right? Meaning I'm consuming more of a good, more of one good, more and less of another good. But ultimately, because it's the same basket, I have my same indifference curve. Okay. If I'm consuming more of the products, then I'm on a different indifference curve, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay. Okay. So to start off with, when we're saying indifference, the actual, and I obviously Googled it, but it's a noun. So it's basically says lack of interest. So it's a very foreign concept to say, do you then have an indifference curve to particular goods when we're talking about the level of satisfaction? Because the two things kind of don't speak to each other. But the concept is that if you have this basket of goods that you have to consume, regardless of the volume, if you're consuming your basket of goods, you are indifferent. Okay, whether it's more or less, as long as you're consuming a certain amount of that basket of goods, you are indifferent to it. Okay, so that's what we're trying to say. So the indifference curve is a curve that shows all the combinations of two products, and we always compare. Hence, I said, think of it in the concept of a PPC, where it's two choices that you are making, but ultimately we always want to maximize our level of satisfaction. So we're saying, even if I'm consuming more of product A and less of product B, or more of product B and less of product A, I'm still indifferent because I'm still maximizing my level of satisfaction. Okay. Or utility. Another way of saying satisfaction is utility. Okay, so it's combination. So regardless of the combination that you are consuming of either of the two products, you have the same indifference curve. So think of it in the concept of the PPC. If we are on the same PPC curve, we are indifferent whether we are at point A, point B, as long as we're on the PPC. We are indifferent. Okay. And then you know that in economics, there are always rules and it's always based on assumptions. So we have three basic assumptions, and they always ask these in the exam. So just take note of it. There are three basic assumptions when we refer to the indifference curve. So the first one is the assumption of completeness, consistency, and then non-satiation. So what we are saying there is incompleteness, ranking all the possible combinations or bundles in order of preference. And another way to say that is the cardinal approach. So there we are again. Okay, can you then rank them in order? Cardinal approach, sorry, ordinal approach. Can you then rank them in order of preference? Okay, there I said. Then consistency or transparency, what we're saying is consumers will always act consistently. It always happens like that. So the same bundle of goods that you are purchasing this month is 99.9% of the time the same bundle of goods that you're going to purchase the next month. Now, the order in which you do it, or the order in preference, or the volume that you're doing it in, i.e., this month I've decided I'm going to have more bananas, less apples, whatever the case is, you're still going to buy bananas and apples. That's the reality. But are you now going to buy 2 bundles or you're going to buy 1 bundle? Our preference doesn't change. We will always act consistently month in and month out. Okay. So the last one, there we're saying, as consumers, more is always preferred to less. So we want to maximize our level of satisfaction in understanding that we always want to consume more. The reason we are unable to consume more is because of our budget. So we all have limited means. So we're trying to stick towards maximizing our level of satisfaction while sticking within our budget. And these 2 combinations, or these 3 elements, is then the assumption that we then base on our indifference curves. Okay. So I said to you, think of the concept of the PPC, right? So our axis, product A, I'm sorry, it's so small. There we go. Okay, so we have our first, what we call a utility curve. Where's my label? Sorry, ABC. There we go. Okay, so there we are. So we're saying that we have product A and product B. Okay, if you are at point A on this curve, point B, point C, point D, and then point E, I'm sorry, it's very small. Okay, you are then indifferent. So as long as you are on the curve, you are maximizing your level of satisfaction, whether that means that you're consuming more of product A, less of product B at point A versus, let's say, product C, point C, where you kind of look like you are equal in terms of the consumption of the 2 products. Anywhere on this, what we call a utility curve, you are indifferent as long as you're on the same curve. But when you move curves, meaning your curve has now increased, your level of satisfaction has entailed also increased. So in terms of the assumptions that we have, consumers always prefer more to less. So if your income allows, meaning now you have an increase, or something happens and now you can consume more of a good, or even the price of the good has changed, meaning the price of the good has decreased, so you can then purchase more of the product, which means ultimately you'll move to a higher indifference curve, because now your level of satisfaction is going to increase because you can purchase more of the product. So we always prefer more to less. So the idea is to constantly increase our indifference curves and constantly be moving to higher and higher and higher and higher indifference curves in terms of the combination of the products that we are purchasing. And looking at all 3 of these elements together, so your U, I forgot to label the one, but this should have been U0, U1, U2, U3, utility curve 0, utility curve 1, utility curve 2, and then utility curve 3. The idea is that we want to get to a higher and higher utility curve, but in understanding that if I am on utility curve 3, anywhere on that curve, I am indifferent. Okay, as long as I'm on the highest possible utility curve, right? Okay, so there. Okay, so we're looking at these 2 products, right? So now I said it's the quantity of bread and the quantity of meat. So I haven't looked at your assignment yet, but take note of the quantity because that's where I deducted marks in your assignment, because a lot of you gave me the 2 products, great, but you did not tell me it's the quantity of the products. And unfortunately, you lost marks there because in economics, it's either the price and the quantity or it's the quantity and the quantity. So you have to be very consistent with that. So looking at these 2 products, so we have the quantity of bread and then we have the quantity of meat. So I say to you, as long as you're on the same indifference curve, you have maximized your level of satisfaction, right? So if you are at point A, which is consumption of 6, let's say loaves of bread versus 1 item of meat, versus point B where you're at 3 loaves of bread or 3 slices of bread, whatever you want to call it, and 2 portions of meat, versus point C, which is 3 to 2, and then obviously point D, which is then 4 to, is that 1.5? I should have made those numbers clearer. Okay, you have maximized your level of satisfaction if either way, even if you're at point A, B, C, or D, you have maximized your level of satisfaction. We're just now trying to figure out, are you going to be, are you sacrificing or willing to sacrifice? Because in understanding that if you're moving from point A to point B, there is some level of sacrifice that's happening, right? So are you prepared to sacrifice? So let's say you're moving from point A to point B, okay? Meaning you're consuming 6 loaves of bread and 1 portion of meat versus 3 loaves of bread and 2 portions of meat. So if you had to move from point A to point B, what are you sacrificing? Okay, so you're sacrificing there 3 portions, 3 loaves of bread in order to gain 1 portion of meat. So are you willing to sacrifice that? Because if you ask, if you say, yes, I'm willing to do that, you are indifferent. Whether you are consuming 6 loaves of bread and 1 portion of meat versus 3 to 2, you are indifferent. You're happy to do it, you're indifferent to it. Okay. So the marginal, this is where it comes in, the marginal rate of substitution. So remember in the previous learning unit, we said marginal is a word that will be repeated concurrently in the next few chapters. Marginal means additional. Okay. So the rate at which the consumer is prepared to sacrifice a quantity of one good in order to obtain one additional unit of another good. Okay, so I'll repeat that. It's the rate at which a consumer is prepared to sacrifice. So we're moving from point A to point B. I am willing to sacrifice the consumption of 3 loaves of bread in order to gain 1 portion of meat. Because that's how our budgets work. If I'm willing to say, I'm going to buy more meat this month, my budget is fixed. I unfortunately don't have an unlimited income. So my budget is fixed for the month. So I'm making the best financial decisions based on my budget. Okay. I'm then saying, if I want to increase my consumption of meat, I want to purchase more meat, I have to sacrifice, I have to be willing to sacrifice something within my budget. And if I'm comparing the 2 products, I'm saying I'm willing to give up 3 loaves of bread in order for me just to purchase 1 more unit of meat, right? And that's the marginal rate of substitution, or the law of substitution, or essentially the law of diminishing marginal utility. All 3 concepts mean this exact same thing. Are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to sacrifice, or how much are you willing to sacrifice in order to gain 1 additional unit of another product? And that's where the word marginal comes in. It comes in when saying, I'm willing to obtain 1 additional unit of the product, but what am I sacrificing in order to do that? Okay. My arrows, love it. Okay, that's an activity that you can try. So then we're saying, okay, the marginal rate of substitution, the MRS, essentially then tells us the slope of our curve, how steep or how flat our curve is. So that's where we're at. Okay, and then I just showed you. So the less plentiful bread becomes, the less bread Kevin is willing to swap out for more portions of meat. So what we're saying there is the higher you are on your indifference curve, right? And as you move down on that indifferent curve, meaning moving from point A to point B, and then B to C, and then C to ultimately D, the lower the quantities, the less you are willing to sacrifice. And isn't that what's happening in the real world? If you have very little, you already have not much to give up in order to gain, because you have so little as it is. But the more you consuming of a good, the more you are willing to sacrifice to gain something else. Okay, so think of it in terms of your buying power, if you want to call it that. Okay, the more money you have, the more you are willing to make these choices. The less money you have, the less likely that you can make alternative choices because you have very limited income. Okay, so the rate at which he substituted bread for meat has decreased as he's moving downwards. So moving from A to B, he sacrificed 3 loaves to gain 1 portion of meat. Then if he went from B to C, there is at 3 to 2, so he's sacrificing now 1 unit of bread for 1 more unit of meat. And then if he moves from C to D, he's now again 1 unit of meat, but it's 0.5 now. So, yes, 1 more unit of meat, but he's only willing to sacrifice 0.5 units of bread. So it gets less and less and less. Your sacrificing becomes less and less and less the less you have. Okay. So the law of substitution here then states that the scarcer a good becomes, the greater its substitutional value will be. So as we move downwards on your indifference curve from left to right along your that same indifference curve, your marginal rate of substitution then decreases. So your what did we say now? Your gradient tends to decrease, and the law of substitution then can therefore also be called or referred to as the law of diminishing, gets less, okay, marginal additional rate of substitution. So the lower you are on your indifference curve, the less you are willing to sacrifice to gain 1 more unit of a product. That's essentially what we're saying. Okay. I said to you. So basically, what it means is if you're thinking of a concept of a straight line, so each point has its own straight line, okay, which is why it's given us our own slope or our own gradient. So this is just a combination of all of these straight lines then that which gave us our utility curve. So this is just for you to note. It's not for you to understand that it's made up of a lot of straight lines or points of a straight line that ultimately we then join together and it formed our utility curve. So it's our tangent. Another way of saying tangent is our slope of our curve. Okay. Again, we're not going to ask that you then calculate the slope of a curve, because that is the assumption already given to you. So this is things that we assume you already know. Okay, so you don't have to calculate it, but understand that that's how it gets generated, right? Okay, so the properties of our indifference curve. So we have assumptions when it comes to indifference curve, which is our 3 assumptions, and then we have our properties. So our properties here, we're saying, is downward sloping from left to right. The more you have at the top of your indifference curve as you move down from left to right, the less you're willing to sacrifice. Okay, so as you move downwards. So it's convex in origin, meaning it's not concave. So your concave would have been your PPC. So convex is an inward PPC curve, if you want to call it that, right? So the slope or how the design of the indifference curve is very important. So you're probably going to get a mark for giving us the correct convex curve and not a concave like a PPC. And the higher the indifference curve is, okay, so we want to keep moving to a higher indifference curve or utility curve. So we want to get higher and higher and higher and higher because then we are ultimately maximizing our level of satisfaction. Okay. The one thing that you will note also is that your indifference curves never ever intersect with each other. They get closer and closer and closer and closer to each other, but they never cross each other because each indifference curve has its own budget, meaning the more money you have, the more of these goods you can consume. So if you're on the same indifference curve, right, you have maximized your level of satisfaction based on that budget. But if you have more money, you'll move to a higher indifference curve, but these two curves never intersect with each other. Okay. So looking, like we said, point number one, we're always moving from left to right. So moving from point A to point B or B to C or C to D as we move down, 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 and down, in order for us to consume more and more and more and more of a product. So there we're looking at, again, the law of substitution, okay, as we move down our indifference curve. So that's part one. Then part two, sorry, I'm just going to go back quickly. Part two is then us saying this, how does our indifference curve look? So it's convex in origin, okay? Again, you do not need to draw the straight lines for each point. We understand that that's how we have generated your indifference curve, but you don't need to draw that. So you only need to give us the curve that says U, which is our utility curve or indifference curve, okay? Not the straight lines. So this is now what we call an indifference map, which is a combination of different utility curves or indifference curves, okay? So I said to you, we want to maximize our level of satisfaction, meaning we want to get higher and higher and higher in terms of our indifference curve, being able to purchase or consume more and more and more of products given our budget. Okay. But you can see here, like we're saying, U1, U2, U3, they never touch each other because each curve has its own combination of goods based on that budget. Okay, so we want to get to as close to U3, U4, U5, and obviously as consumers, we have a lot of indifference curves, but the constricting factor is always going to be our income. Okay, so we want to get to a higher and higher and higher utility curve in understanding that these utility curves never match, never touch each other. Okay. And this is where I said to you, they never ever touch. They don't touch each other at all. Okay. They get closer and closer and closer together, but they don't intercept with one another at all. Okay. And then there's a video which you can listen to at your own time. Okay. So the last section, then we're looking at, and I kept saying to you, we're making choices here based on our budget. So the budget is the controlling factor here. Okay, so we're going to explain, and after this, we'll probably end the class. We'll explain the properties of the indifference curves, deriving and explaining the function of a budget line, what there needs to happen in terms of the budget line, and then your consumer equilibrium in understanding that if as a consumer you're not in equilibrium, then it's obviously not going to work. Okay. And then we'll explain and show you what then consumer equilibrium looks like with the indifference curve in understanding there's a budget line. Okay, so we say to you, this is now our indifference curves. Okay, so in this, it's quantity of product, in this case, product apples versus quantity of product bananas. Okay, and I said to you, if you had U0 anywhere, point A, B, C, D, E, you are indifferent as long as you are on U0, the curve U0. So anywhere the combinations that you are choosing to consume of the two products, you are indifferent, you're happy. Okay. Our understanding is we want to maximize our level of satisfaction, meaning moving to the next indifference curve and the next one and the next one. So we want to get to U3 at some point. And the only reason we are unable to get to U3 is because of our budget. Okay. So now, all the combinations of the two products that we can afford to purchase. Okay. So for example's sake, if our budget is 24 Rand, and we're saying that bread is 4 Rand and meat is 6 Rand. Okay, where do we then start when we are trying to construct this budget line? Okay, just a reminder, so our budget 24 Rand, bread 4 Rand, and meat is 6 Rand. So we're drawing our curve, quantity of bread, quantity of meat. So we're saying, where do we start? So the first point we start is by saying, if I had to consume only bread, okay, in understanding that my budget is 24 Rand, I take my total budget divided by the price of the product. So it would be total budget is 24 Rand divided by 4 Rand, that equals 6. So if I only had to consume bread, I would be consuming 6 loaves of bread. Okay, you would then do the same for meat. If I only had to consume meat and my budget is still 24 Rand, I'd say 24 divided by 6. So that's 4 portions of meat. And then connect the lines. That is my budget line for bread and meat. So that if I only consume bread, so it's the total budget divided by the price of the product, which equals to 6 units of bread, and I only consume meat, the total budget 24 Rand divided by the price of meat, which is 6 Rand, that gives me 4 units. Draw a straight line. That is my budget curve for meat and bread. Okay. Budget line. Great stuff. Now I said to you, in terms of that is our budget line at the moment. Our slope, okay, is 6 to 4. So we just need you to understand that there is a slope, there is a gradient here. Okay, but you are not going to be expected to calculate the gradient. You just understand that because it's a straight line, it does have a gradient. So basically the formula for a straight line, y is equals to mx plus c. The c's we've given you right now, which is our intercept points. Okay, the mx is our gradient. Okay, so looking, there we are. Okay. Ooh, the video, me clicking so fast. Okay, so understanding that we have this indifference map, so we have all of these utility curves or indifference curves, and we say to you, we want to get to the highest possible utility curve given our budget. So now we have our budget line, and we have all of these indifference curves. So you don't have to draw the multiple utility curves. We understand as economists, we understand that consumers have multiple indifference curves. Okay, we want to match that indifference curve to our budget line. So at the point where your budget line intercepts, so literally that point where the arrow is, at the point where your budget line intercepts with your utility curve, you are then in consumer equilibrium. Okay, because you are then able to purchase those goods and you are maximizing your level of satisfaction. Therefore, you are in consumer equilibrium. Okay, so just a reminder again, you do not need to draw the multiple utility curves. So utility curve there, U0 and then U2, you don't have to draw that. We understand that you have multiple indifference curves. You only need to draw a utility curve U1 and the budget line. Okay. You also don't have, you have to show us that you did do a calculation to get the intercept points. That you also have to show us. Okay. So what I tell the students is you're always starting with a budget, because remember, as a consumer, no money equals I can't consume. So the law of demand or the theory of demand is still based on the understanding that I must be willing and able to purchase the good. So budget always comes first. Okay. So first do your budget line, meaning calculating your intercept points of product A and then calculating your intercept points for product B, drawing then your budget line in understanding that you must always label, right? So you can either label it and say it's budget line, or you can say BL. So we usually say BL1 because in understanding that as your budget increases, your budget line will either parallel shift to the right, meaning your budget has now increased, or parallel to the left if your budget has decreased. That can always happen. The other way to change this budget line is if the price of the product changes. So if the price of the product then increases or decreases depending on which product it is, that also affects your budget line, because you would either consume more of a product or less of a product depending on whether it's become more expensive or less expensive. Okay, so those are the only 4 elements that would change your budget line. Understanding that we still have these multiple utility curves. So if my utility curve and my budget line don't match, I'm not in equilibrium. I'm not in consumer equilibrium. Okay, so our aim is to always make them match each other. Okay, there we go. My arrows are very much off at this point. Okay, so from this perspective, they would ask it to the students more graphically and in words, not mathematically, but in understanding that the mathematical principle still applies. Okay, so in words, we are saying consumers maximize their total utility subject to budget constraints. In English, we are maximizing our level of satisfaction given our budget constraints, given our means, given our income. So I want to be able to maximize my level of satisfaction in the consumption of certain goods based on my budget, based on my income. Okay. And then graphically, where the budget line is tangent to the highest possible indifference curve, we are in consumer equilibrium. Okay. So where the two, we have multiple indifference curves based on your level of satisfaction of these goods or the consumption or the notion that you will derive a level of satisfaction from the consumption of these goods. Okay. And then we match that to our budget line. We are in consumer equilibrium. So basically, mathematically, what we're saying is your gradient and your slope of each from your utility curves, in understanding that a utility curve is made up of multiple straight lines, the gradient will match. So multiple straight lines gives you your utility curve, and your budget line, the slope will match. That's what we're saying. Okay, mathematically. Hence, I'm saying mathematically, we're not too worried about that. Our main idea here, our main understanding is the words and graphically. Okay. And that is the section for today. Are there any questions? I know I talk a lot. Just going to stop the recording.